Now, as we proceed in our second session, we are going in the session that will be more focused to METPEX. It is a METPEX approach to quality and accessibility of public transport. And here we'll have the honor to have Mr. Patrick Mercier-Handisyde, the principal administration in the DG for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, who also is the project officer of METPEX project. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be there today, and thank you for inviting me, indeed. Also, I edited the project and discovered it very recently, so I'm very happy to be there to learn about all your results all today and listening to all your interesting debate, I suppose. Thank you again to the Economic and Social Committee, and I see some members which I know they're in the room still, for inviting us in those fantastic meeting rooms. Kerfitch, my colleague, put project in the context of the transport policy mostly, and I would like to put it a little bit in the context of the transport research policy. METPEX indeed was launched in the framework, so-called framework FP7, which is the 7th framework for research and development, which lasted from 2007 to 2013. We already started the next framework program, as you know, Horizon 2020. On this, in FP7, for the first time, there was a dedicated priority on urban mobility. So this is to be mentioned, which had 4 main objectives. First of all, improving the mobility of people and of the transport of goods in urban and peri-urban areas. And it did concern all transport modes and all users. And users are key, indeed, in this discussion today. Secondly, the aim was to develop clean and energy efficient, safe and intelligent urban transport systems. Both, I would say, technological development, economic development, but also to support policy and regulatory aspects. And finally, the last point, which is important in this context of this discussion today, to develop new and accessible public transport systems. And indeed, METPEX did support directly these last objectives with this development of an inclusive passenger experience measurement tools, but also with all the database that it has developed within the project, also to develop the quality of public transport. And I'm sure Andree, in a second, will explain that in a little bit more detail after me. Public transport, indeed, is, I believe, at the heart of a modern, sustainable transport system, but it's also, as you know, a major citizen concern. The MEP just before me mentioned that at least 80% of the EU population is living in cities. So it's both a major issue for economic and development and also for the quality of life. The development of a modern and attractive public transport system is therefore very necessary. Public authorities, cities, users, and also vehicle manufacturers are key in achieving this sustainable transport system. And also, I think that transport research is a key element in supporting public transport. Within FP7, the 7th frame program, we have supported public transport in different areas. First of all, to develop high-quality public transport, both, I would say, technology research with development of vehicles and intermodal interchanges. Secondly, to support of intelligent mobility systems, being traffic management, multimodal journey planners, etc. Thirdly, accessibility for all. So it's very linked to METPEX, of course. And finally, the take-up of urban transport innovation. So as you can see, we have a lot focused on technological research, but not only. We have developed also and supported socio-economic research, and it will be more emphasis will be given to that in Horizon 2020, of course. And I think METPEX is one of the few examples which support this type of activity, which are key. In the context of the European transport policy, METPEX is also supporting these activities. As you Keir knows very well, because he was very much involved in the writing of this white paper. With regard to urban mobility, the objective was to diminish by half the conventional fuel car in city centers by 2030, and to even ban them completely by 2050. So quite ambitious goal, of course. But to summarize it for public transport, the main aim is to go for a transition from a car-based mobility to a mobility based on walking, cycling, and of course, high-quality public transport. It is quite difficult to support urban mobility, I would say, in a way, because role of the Commission is quite limited due to the subsidiarity principles, but we have anyhow launched several initiatives in the framework of the so-called urban mobility package, in particular to support better SUMP, SUMPs, sustainable urban mobility plans, and also public transport. In terms of research for the future, as I just mentioned previously, we just started 1 year ago the next frame program, which is called Horizon 2020, and which will last from 2014 to 2020. We have already launched a few calls. We are now finishing the second call for proposal, and we will launch very soon, in a few days, the third call for proposal of Horizon 2020. It's a key element, Horizon 2020 of Europe 2020, of the European Union and the European research area, to support, first of all, the economic crisis, to support growth and employment. Secondly, which is important, answer to citizens' concerns with regard to their quality of life, safety, and environment. And thirdly, to reinforce the global position of the EU in research, innovation, and technology. There were very quickly 3 main priorities in Horizon 2020. First of all, excellence in science, so in short word, basic research, to support the industrial leaderships, more technology-driven research, I would say. And finally, the so-called societal challenges. And transport is one of the societal challenges. It's called smart, green, and integrated transport. And we have up to a very important budget, up to 6 billion euros for the whole frame of Horizon 2020. Within this societal challenge on transport, there are different actions which support urban mobility and public transport. We'd like to mention, first of all, the urban mobility area itself, which is managed by DG Move, with the Innovation Resource Efficient Competitive and Urban Mobility and Transport Program, the so-called CIVITAS program, which is continuing now with a, I would say, bigger emphasis. This is a big program to exchange best practice between cities, to make it in short. Secondly, which is also important, and it's what you are doing there, and you could continue maybe in the future, is the socio-economic and behavioral research and forward-looking activities, foresight, for policy making, so to supporting in particular the transport policy. And finally, the so-called mode-specific areas, which is more technology-driven, I would say, that DG Research is focusing on, for example, to support road and rail transport, especially with technological development. Just to conclude very quickly, I hope that the research tools and development that you have developed in METPEX will give better well-being in cities, a better place to work, and live in better use of public space and public transport. This is important that your work is not finishing there, that you could continue. It's always a wish we have when we have a European project, but we unfortunately cannot follow all that. So I push you very much to continue and to maintain links with existing networks, etc. We have finance. I remember we discussed that with Andree a little bit at the break before the start of this conference. We had another project, Mediate project. We developed also some tools which are maintained, I suppose, now with the police network, the city network. So maybe you can have a discussion with them. That could be interesting. This should be important, the result of this project, for different stakeholders. As I mentioned, city authorities, decision makers, but also transport providers. This should be also important part of European citizens, including young people, aging population, it was mentioned before, or people with reduced mobility. So I really look forward to listen to all your debates, your presentation here today, and wish you a very good conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. We think that we'll try to go for the next period with Horizon 2020 ideas. It is good that this framework program, especially the new calls of Horizon 2020, has an interlink and interrelation, not only transport per se, but with energy issues, which is very important, as it gives a more holistic view to the problems that the current European society at least is facing now. As we are proceeding to the next speech, I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Professor Andree Woodcock from Coventry University, who is also the project manager of METPEX project. Andree, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this conference as the Principal Investigator of METPEX Project. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank my consortium. You've been a pleasure to work with. You've been enthusiastic and hardworking, and what more could I want? This conference has been organised, as I say, by METPEX, and it's one of our dissemination activities. You'll find us at a variety of transport conferences, such as TRAA, Polis and Transed, and you can read about our work on your memory sticks as part of your PAN. We're also going to be publishing a METPEX book, and there are some abstracts on the memory stick about that book. So before I get started, I'd also like to thank Elena and her team at Signosis for organising today's events. However, the conference isn't about METPEX. METPEX forms the context in which I would like us to discuss the issues around customer experience and the quality of experience. I'll be presenting a small amount about METPEX, but please have a look at the roll-ups outside to find out more about the project and visit our website. We have found a lot of issues around the customer experience, but also a lot about the barriers. So when you listen to the talks today, I'd like you to consider what the real needs of passengers are in relation to public transport. How can we start to use the customer experience and our measurement of that to plan more accessible, human-centred public transport services? What can we do if we understand what the perceived quality is? How can that lead to change and innovation in society? How can we make the technology more humanised and more human-centred? We're moving into a time of the Internet of Things where we can collect open source and real-time data. We're only just starting on that journey. How can that be used? Do the transport authorities, the local authorities and the operators have the wherewithal, the capacity and the understanding to know how to use that information and how to use it in a way in which we can develop innovative services for the customers? And lastly, how do we move from a reactive to a more proactive sort of transport solution? And I'll be discussing that later on in terms of looking at land use, accessibility. So mobility is there as a service to provide citizens with access to essential services. How can we move towards understanding that? I'm sure during the course of the day you'll also raise issues as well, but if you just think about where we want to go with this in the future and how the customer experience can drive change within the industry. So I'm hopefully not going to bore you too much with a PowerPoint presentation, but we're going to just run through very quickly the project, some of the results, the METPEX team, and continuing the journey. So I'm a commuter, I drive into work. It's been estimated that I lose 2 days a year sitting in traffic jams, and you will find me at least 4 times a day in a traffic jam. Other people have spoken much more eloquently about the problems of transport, so I'm not going to dwell on that just now. However, good, like this. However, what does public transport actually offer me? Thank you. As a consumer, I can sit cocooned in my little bubble in my car. If I want to go onto public transport, I'm faced with congestion, overcharging, not a high quality experience. And that is only if I can actually access that transport itself. For disabled people, those with communication difficulties, those on low incomes, there are a series of other barriers to overcome. If I want to use public transport as just part of my commuter journey, or I want to walk to work, the urban infrastructure provides me with other obstacles as well, which make it unpleasant. The aim of the METPEX was to actually look at the whole journey experience. We started with our proposal about 4 years ago, so the whole journey was a sort of new experience. Mistakenly, we called it passenger. It should have been traveller, because what we wanted to do was look at active forms of transport as well. So looking at the needs of cyclists and pedestrians as well, in terms of the journey that they take every day. So we're looking at going from the pre-planning stage of the journey through to arrival at the destination. And there are a lot of tools out there already, developed by colleagues in the UK and elsewhere, but they just focus on the part of the journey that they can influence. So what's the quality of the experience on the train, on the tram, on the coach? But they don't actually bother about how people might get onto their services or what the station design is like, because they can't influence that. So our tools are looking at the whole journey and as such are useful to local authorities who have a shortage of information about the whole journey that people undertake, about trip chaining, the experience that people actually face every day. So we're looking at the whole journey as our unit of analysis, and with an ergonomics background, I'm very much interested in optimising that experience at all stages for all people. If part of that experience is tough, is difficult, you feel insecure, then you're either not going to travel or you're going to travel in a different way. And for many people, private transport is the most secure way. Again, looking at ergonomics, I have put up there part of a model of ergonomics developed by myself and Rachel Benedict, but all I want you to take from that is we are looking at a multitude of problems which go from micro level, so maybe looking at the interaction with ticket machines and how usable they are, to all the macro level factors that might influence the strategies and the operation of transport services. What we want to look at are individual factors, attitudes towards public transport, your sort of journey, your beliefs, your physiology. Can you actually move through a station? Looking at social and cultural issues, the attitudes of other passengers towards public transport. If everyone thinks it's dirty, they might carry on misbehaving. Looking at the design of the transport vehicles, but also the design of the services. What are the operators thinking about, or the transport planners, when they design these services, when you have to walk a long way across stations, across intermodal interchanges, in airports? Where's the provision of the services for you if you're disabled, if you have limited mobility? And also looking at the wider factors in terms of the management and control of transport services and the infrastructure on which they run. So that's a lot to think about, but that was the scope of the METPEX project. So we started off with a basic proposition that in order to attract people onto public transport, the perception of it needs to improve. And a first step in doing that is to try and develop a tool that will actually measure the perceived quality of the public transport in a reliable and standardised way. And local authorities don't have this. They have limited resources. They might outsource the work to other companies, but they still have difficulty in actually trying to reach the hard-to-reach groups. So we want to develop something that is standardised and reliable, that can be used by the operators, the authorities, and transport providers. And we want to assess, and this is a question for us today, how using that measurement can actually be used to improve transport services and actually draw attention to transport quality and to get that feeding into the new services. Our METPEX consortium consisted of 16 partners, ranging from Sweden down to Portugal, from Ireland across to Romania. And in 8 of those sites, we actually conducted METPEX trials to look at the development of our tools and to actually achieve key performance indicators. Our method to create these key performance indicators was to start with an extensive set of variables which would measure the whole journey. And I talked a little bit about the ergonomics model, but we did start off with over 1,000 variables which we had to prioritise and sift and actually map onto research instruments. So a lot of our time was looking at the best practices or any variable that could be used to measure the quality of the passenger experience. We sifted these down and prioritised them into over 250 questions, baseline questions about attitudes to public transport, people's demographics, where they were travelling from, and control questions. Then we had tier 1 questions, which were the quality components, and then we're looking at mode-specific questions and user-specific questions as well. So we had a 5-part version of the tool, and from these questions we mapped those onto real-time and retrospective surveys. We had online collection through a game and a sat-nav application, online surveys, pen and paper surveys, and because our trial could only take place at 1 month, we also ran focus groups for those traditionally hard to reach groups that we might not have reached through our survey. This is an example of the real-time data gathering method that we trialled during the course of the survey. So we had a bespoke sat-nav system which we could use to push questions through to travellers in real time as they were moving through the transport system. So they set up their profile, they said where they were travelling to and from and the modes of transport they were using, and as we plotted their movement through the system, we could push very targeted questions on them so we could understand what their experience was at that time. And Fotis is here today and will describe more of that if you're interested in that. We had over 5,000 responses to our survey methods. We had trials in Bucharest, Coventry, Dublin, Grevena, Rome, Valencia, Vilnius, and we used the FIRE network as well. And then we looked at analysing our results in terms of the effectiveness of the different survey tools, in terms of the different types of journey people are undertaking, in terms of public transport, private vehicles, walking, cycling and public transport. And we also looked at the requirements for the special user groups, those with communication and mobility impairments, the elderly, travellers with children and dependents, people from low income groups, the rural community dwellers, young people and also commuters. And Roberto is here and he can provide you with lots and lots of detailed information about how we did it and what the aims of what the results were. So we could do comparisons between cities, between user groups, between transport modes and between stages of the journey. But that wasn't the aim of METPEX. The aim of METPEX was to provide key performance indicators which mapped onto different stages of the journey, different transport modes and user types. And these tools that we want to develop can be used to measure the quality of the passenger experience in a reliable way for the operators, authorities, researchers and passenger interest groups. So we can not only benchmark performance, but we know that these tools are valid and reliable. We've developed nearly 30 perceived quality components around customer rights, accessibility, transport policy, transport interchanges. And underneath each of these key performance indicators is a set of variables that we found are relevant to that particular indicator. So if we look at, as an example, the variables associated with the design of transport stations, significant aspects were the adequacy of staff presence, the character and the atmosphere of the stations, overall accessibility, signage, benching, seating, overall cleanliness and maintenance. I have partners who've developed the key performance indicators, and if you're interested in the multiple regression, then please see them later on. So those were in terms of the quality components. Looking down into our tool, we also looked at indicators specifically associated with different transport modes. We have indicators for trains, coaches, trams, metro, walking, cycling, and also for cars as well, because private vehicles do still form part of people's whole journey experiences. Slicing the data another way, we also have indicators associated with the different user groups, irrespective of the mode in which they were travelling. And these, in terms of our user groups, were related to women, commuters, older people, people with from low-income groups and visitors. And again, what I've indicated here are just the high-level indicators, but under each of these we have a set of variables pertinent to that. We've also got indicators for people with mobility impairments, communication difficulties, rural dwellers, passengers who are actually travelling with children and dependents and young people as well. So what we're doing is providing a suite of tools that can be used as and when necessary. Again, variables related to, associated with using public transport, in particular for those with mobility and communication impairments. I said that we also run focus groups, and I'm quite interested in focus groups because they provide you with very micro-level information. It's all right looking at surveys, but you can only sort of say, well, what was your experience like, rather than what's your experience like on this particular pavement or this particular section of your journey. So we found a convergence of issues for our hard-to-reach groups around passenger and operator attitudes. Was it pleasant to actually use public transport? Were you discriminated against? Did the operators treat you disrespectfully? How were your complaints handled? A lot of people, make complaints, but nothing happens. It doesn't affect change. They might not even get a result from their complaint. Looking at the inaccessibility of smaller stations and vehicles, which is where people travel to and from. It's not just about the tourist route from one major tourist destination to another, but how can you promote accessibility throughout the city? We have issues regarding the lack of reliable transport information, which is important if the transport services have disruptions or if you have a lack of mobility. Looking at staff availability and the knowledge, ticketing and zoning, and the poor quality of information. From this, we're finding that there is evidence of discrimination against certain groups. They can't go where they want to, when they want to, with whom they want, and they have to pay extra to get the mobility that they need. As I've said, we also have indicators for each stage of the journey, from planning through to arrival at destination. So from the planning stage is looking at the provision of journey information, advanced ticketing, and looking at the whole journey. It's also the design of the city, the infrastructure. How accessible are pavements, especially if you're getting poor parking, parking regulations aren't enforced, and people park on the pavements. Additionally, on top of all this, we prototyped a back-end survey management system, looking at data preservation, encryption of it, data security. We're looking at servers with backup and quality checks. So in this, we are looking at if METPEX tools rolled out across the whole community, what would you have to do to secure that data? How would you actually manage it? How would the operators manage it? How would they manage their surveys? So we're looking at campaign management tools for data entry, for the tailoring of questions based on the needs of the clients, how you can monitor response rates and change who you're pushing the questionnaire to so you've got a reliable sample. You've not got the same people answering your questions all the time. So what we're about today is continuing the journey after METPEX. METPEX has worked with current transport provision with a view to informing new transport directions, but we want to go further than that. We don't want to be reactive, we want to be proactive. We want to include the consumers in the planning of the next transport services. We want to have proactive transport solutions that work with the cities, where we're integrating spatial and transport planning and accessibility. We want to create services that are resilient to changes in the demographics, where people live, the way in which they work, that are resilient to new entrants into the market, which are resilient to climate change, to austerity measures. And the customer has to be part of this journey. And we have to work with the local authorities and looking at policy and regulations to ensure that the customer voice is heard so that we can humanise the solutions that we're providing. So I hope today that we can discuss all these issues in the following sessions. And lastly, hopefully, maybe not quite lastly, I'd like to thank and acknowledge our funders. So thank you for supporting the project, and to acknowledge everyone who's worked on this project and will hopefully continue the journey with us in future Horizon 2020 projects. So thank you for the team, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Andree. Thank you, all of you, for the first opening session. And now I would like to invite and to be on the floor my colleague Tiago Pimentel from VTM, who will introduce you the speakers of the first session.